Cute little headset, honey. You planning on calling somebody or just keeping the seat warm for the grown-ups? Log the traffic, stay in your lane, and let the people who actually run this floor run it. Captain Grant Whitlock said it without leaning forward. He said it the way a man says a thing he has said 100 times to 100 faces. Coffee cup loose in one hand, half his attention already back on the map wall, the other half playing to the floor behind him. The Tactical Operations Center heard it. 2 radio operators at the bank, a current operations crew at the long table, a row of map feeds glowing along the far wall, and above the door, a clock that read 0314 in red. The woman at the radio did not answer at once. She did the thing she always did before she spoke. She read the room. 9 radios, 3 map feeds, 1 staff journal open on its stand, the pen resting in the crease, ready to remember everything said tonight. She counted the floor without looking like she was counting anything. The antennas, the field phones, the door that mattered, the back corner radio nobody monitored. And then she let her eyes settle, for exactly 1 second, on the headset hung over the journal stand. And then she moved. She seated herself at the radio bank. She set a thin green notebook square to the table edge, both hands, a small flat motion. She lifted the headset and seated it, 1 adjustment to the band, 1 to the boom mic, and then she went still, and she did not touch it again. The first thing anyone with eyes would have noticed about her, if anyone had been looking, was how little she moved. The Brigade Tactical Operations Center ran in low light. It was built for radios, not for people. Cold air came down steady from the vents, the way water moves over stone, the same temperature for the machines and the men. The current operations map wall carried the fight. Unit icons, phase lines, a casualty marker blinking somewhere on a road that did not exist. It was a warfighter exercise, a whole division fighting a war that was not real on radios that were, a brigade staff awake at 03 to prove they could run a command post when the world was dark and the net was the only light. The morning commander's update brief was 4 hours out. The staff journal would carry the whole night to it. Specialist Ren Delgado, 22 years old, 2 years in, sat at the next seat on the bank. She had watched the captain's coffee cup swing toward the new arrival, and she had felt the old heat climb her face on the woman's behalf. She slid a spare log sheet across and half whispered an orientation. Division nets on the primary, the brigade admins on the... She doesn't need the brief, Delgado. First Lieutenant Brett Causey crossed behind them, the assistant battle captain's walk, certain and busy. She needs to copy traffic and stay quiet. Eyes on your net. We've got a brief to make, and we're not making it babysitting an augmentee. Delgado put the log sheet back. She kept her eyes on her net. She did not stop watching the woman beside her. At the NCO Ike desk against the wall, Master Sergeant Theo Ramsey looked up from his log, and what caught him was not the badge. It was the bearing. 20 years of standing watch in rooms like this one had taught him to read a soldier by how they entered, and this one had entered like she had built the place. She had mapped the floor before she sat. She had found the dead radio in the corner with her eyes first, the way only certain people find the one that matters first. Ramsey had broken in 100 augmentees, and a cold, small instinct told him he had just watched someone very senior sit down and pretend to be no one at all. Ramsey did not say anything. That was the job at 3 in the morning. He wrote a single line in the margin of his log. Time, 1 word. Known? And he let her sit. Whitlock was already 3 problems past her. He stood at the current ops table with the map, jaw set, running the timeline out loud the way he ran everything out loud. He was 30 years old, 8 of them in uniform, and he had built a reputation on never being the slowest decision in the room. He liked his floor fast. He liked it loud. He liked knowing at a glance who mattered and who did not. And no one had ever told him the glance was the whole problem. He had looked at the woman in the plain uniform with no rank and the plastic visitor badge, and he had filed her under nobody, and he had moved on. What he could not have known, because he had not looked long enough to know it, was that the woman had already learned more about his command post in 20 minutes than he had taught it in a year. She had counted the radios and found 2 with the wrong frequency cards taped beneath them. She had watched the staff journal go unsigned through a shift change, a small administrative sin that meant no one had owned the record for 40 minutes. She had marked which soldiers looked at the captain before they answered a question, and which ones answered first and looked after, and she had filed every one of them away. Not with judgment, just with the cool, even attention of a person who already knew she would own all of it by sunrise. A command post is a machine made of people. She had been reading machines like this one since before the young specialist beside her had learned to drive. There was a thing she believed about command posts, and it was the reason she was sitting in one at 3 in the morning in a borrowed uniform, instead of asleep in quarters, with her name on the door. A staff is never more honest than it is at 03, 4 hours before anyone important is awake to see it. The slides get polished for the brief. The journal gets cleaned for the record. But the net at 3 in the morning tells the truth because the net cannot be polished, only run well or run badly. She had come to hear the truth her command post told when it thought no one was listening, and the truth, so far, was that it ran loud and fast and certain. And that loud and fast and certain is exactly how a good staff gets people killed. The woman at the radio sat a perfect upright watch, on a floor full of motion, chairs rolling, hands moving, the net crackling. She was the one fixed point. Her hands rested flat. Her breathing was slow. Her eyes were not on the captain, and they were not on the clock. They were on the division net, where a call sign had just handed off to the wrong element. A small wrong. The kind of wrong that is nothing in an exercise and is a dead patrol in a war. And she watched it the way you watch a crack start across a windshield. Small, spreading. Already too late to call new. By 0340, the division net was stepping on itself. A unit checked in under a call sign that had been reassigned at the shift change, and the current ops floor began answering the wrong element, passing traffic into a hole, building a picture out of a name that no longer meant what they thought it meant. Whitlock was mid-anecdote at the table, telling Causey about a brigade commander at his last unit, and he missed it. The whole floor missed it. They were listening for their own call signs. The woman at the radio was the only one listening to all of them at once. She went still in the particular way of a person who has stopped hearing the words and started hearing the shape. Then she keyed up, once, low and clean. All stations this net. All stations this net, she said. Last calling station. You are passing traffic to a call sign retired at the shift change. Correct call sign is on the current frequency card, line 4. Send your traffic again, slow, and read back. She said it in the flat, unhurried cadence of someone who has run a net under worse light than this. Correct proward. Correct phrasing. No wasted breath. She untangled the handoff in 3 transmissions and handed the net back the way you hand, back a tool you have wiped clean. The traffic began to flow right. Causey, who had been a half-second from passing a logistics report to the wrong element, looked down at his own card and quietly did not send it. The floor got smoother and a little quieter, and no one at the table could have told you why. Whitlock could feel the floor change under him, and a man like Whitlock does not like the floor changing without his hand on it. He turned. "We don't take net lessons from the help," he said, loud enough to carry. "Copy your log and let it go. That net's been running fine all night." It had not been running fine all night. But the woman did not argue. She wrote one line in the green notebook and let the floor believe whatever it needed to believe. At the NCOIC desk, Ramsey had already pulled the frequency change log. He did it without being asked, because that was also the job. The retired call sign was right there, struck through at the shift change, exactly as she had said. And she had quoted the line number off the frequency card from memory, line 4, without looking at it. Ramsey read it twice. He looked across the dim floor at the still woman at the radio. The augmentee, the captain, had just called the help, and the cold, small instinct from 20 minutes before turned over and became a question with a shape. Where had he heard that voice run a net before? He could not place it, but it sat in him the way a name sits on the tip of the tongue, present and just out of reach, and it would not leave. He had heard that exact cadence somewhere, in some other dark room, on some other bad night, and the not knowing started to bother him more than the floor did. It was the cadence that did it, not the face. Ramsey had spent his whole career around radios, and he had learned that you can tell more about a person from how they talk on a net than from how they talk in a room. Most people speed up on the radio. They crowd the words together. They over-explain. They hold the key down too long because some animal part of the brain believes that if you are talking, you are safe. The rare ones go the other way. They slow down. They leave air in the transmission. They say the fewest words that can possibly carry the meaning, and then they let go of the key because they have learned, somewhere expensive, that the net belongs to everyone, and the next voice on it might be the one that matters. The woman in the back was one of the rare ones. He had only ever known one other operator who ran a net with that much quiet in it, and he had known that operator at the worst moment of his own young life, and his mind would not yet let him put the two together, because the two together did not make sense. So he did the only thing his training left him. He wrote the time in his log, and a second word under the first. Known? Then, beneath it, net. 07. And he underlined the year, and he did not know why, and the not knowing sat in his chest like a stone that would not warm. The net ran clean for the first time all shift. The woman squared her notebook to the table edge, both hands, and went back to her perfect, upright stillness. And on the map wall, far down a road that did not exist, the blinking casualty marker had not moved, and was waiting. The mid-shift turnover was Whitlock's stage, and he used it. He stood at the current ops table with a fresh coffee and made the augmentee a lesson for the incoming crew. He did not have to name her. He pointed at her with his chin. Somebody sent me a comms clerk who thinks she's the brigade signal officer, he said. That ends now. She copies traffic on the back radio. She touches nothing on the division net. And if she keys up on my net again, without my say-so, she's relieved off this floor, and I'll find someone who can follow one simple instruction. We've got a brief in 4 hours. I am not running it with an augmentee grading my crew. Are we clear, or do you want it on a slide? The floor laughed on cue, the way a floor laughs for the man who writes the evaluations. 2 people did not laugh. One was Delgado at the radio bank. The other was Ramsey, who did not look up from his log. Whitlock moved her himself, loudly, for the room, picked up her green notebook, and set it down at the back corner radio, the dead net no one monitored, the seat where augmentees are sent to disappear. The woman gathered the rest of her things and crossed to it without a word. No friction. No sigh. The same economy of motion she did everything with. She sat. She squared the notebook. She seated the headset once, and she went still. If the move stung her, the room could not find the place where it landed. Delgado, believing she was helping, carried a corrected frequency card to the back corner and set it by the notebook, and she whispered it like a gift. I logged the handoff fix under your time, she said. It's in the record. You were right, and nobody else in here would even. Whitlock saw it from across the floor the young specialist, leaning over the augmentee's table. He did not shout. He did something colder. He pulled Delgado off the division net in front of everyone and sent her to the field phone desk by the entrance, the seat where careers go quiet. Delgado gathered her things under the eyes of the floor, her ears burning. At the back corner, she stopped for half a second. "I'm sorry," she said. Low. You were right, and don't apologize for being right." It was the only warmth the woman had shown all night, and it was brief, and there was steel under the warmth, like rebar under poured concrete. Copy it twice. Once where they can see it, once where they can't. Delgado went to the field phone desk and did exactly that. It was a small thing, copying it twice, the kind of thing that does not feel like courage while you are doing it. Delgado was 22. She did not know yet that most of the courage a long career asks of a person looks exactly like this. One true line written into a log on an ordinary night, while the important people are busy being certain about something else. She only knew that the still woman in the back corner had told her the truth was worth keeping in two places, and that she believed the woman more than she believed the captain, and that this, somehow, was the first real decision of her career. The woman took the dead seat and the dead net without protest. She sat her watch. She heard everything, because a good radio operator hears the whole floor no matter where you put the chair, and they had moved her to the back of the room without moving her 1 inch off the net that mattered. There is a kind of person who, when you put them in the worst seat in the room, gets smaller. And there is a kind of person who, when you put them in the worst seat in the room, simply learns the room from the worst seat. From the back corner, she could see the whole floor at once now. The current ops table, the map wall, the journal stand, the field phone desk where they had exiled Delgado, the captain holding court at the center of all of it. She could see who carried the weight and who carried the volume, and she had already learned that on this floor, those were two different people. The volume sat at the center, certain and loud. The weight sat at the edges, the young specialist copying her log twice in a corner, the master sergeant who had stopped writing and started watching, the careful lieutenant who had quietly not sent a report to the wrong element an hour ago and had told no one. She had commanded enough soldiers to know that you build a unit out of the people carrying the weight, not the people making the noise, and she filed the floor's weight-bearers away one by one in the green notebook and in the colder, more permanent ledger behind her eyes. She was, in every way that mattered, already in command. The only person on the floor who did not know it yet was the man running it. If it tightens your jaw to watch the one person in the room who is right get sent to the dead seat for the crime of being right. Good. Hold on to that. Tap subscribe to Honor Tales and stay on this floor with her, because the people who mistook her for nobody are a few hours from finding out exactly who they put in the back corner. By 0430, the exclusion had become paperwork, which is how the careful kind of certainty always ends up. Whitlock started building a record in the staff journal. He logged it cleanly, in the flat language of a man covering his floor, an unqualified augmentee keying up on the division net without authorization, interfering with current operations, relocated to the auxiliary position. He wrote it the way you write a thing you intend to point at later. Ramsey read it over his shoulder on a pass to the coffee urn and said nothing, but his jaw set, because he was watching a captain put into the permanent record of the night the exact opposite of what had happened on it. Then the net turned hot. A simulated patrol took contact down a road on the map wall, and the floor came alive with it. A contact report, then a casualty, then the long, careful rhythm of a 9-line medevac request climbing up from the company. The current ops crew sped up and got loud, 3 voices over each other, hands moving on the map. the captain leaning into it because this was the moment a warfighter grades, the thing division would put on a slide. The floor flooded. From the dead seat in the back corner, the woman copied the 9-line cleanly, line by line, slow in the green notebook. The floor got faster. She got slower. That is the whole trick, and almost no one can do it. When the net floods, the good ones empty out. She wrote down each line as it came over the air, including the one that matters most, the line that is a grid coordinate, the line that tells an aircraft where the wounded soldier is. Then she went very still, because the grid on the current ops board did not match the grid that had come over the net. The crew had written it on the board fast, in the flood, and 2 digits had crossed in the writing. The transmission said the casualty was at a grid ending 18, and the board said 81. 1 transposition, a kilometer of empty field. In an exercise, a graded error. In a war, an aircraft full of medics landing at the wrong place, while a young soldier bled in the right one. She had the real grid in her notebook, copied the first time, slow, while everyone else was fast. She carried it forward the only way a nobody on the dead net can. She caught Delgado's eye at the field phone desk and said it once, low, and Delgado wrote it down. Then she said it once, level, toward the current ops table. Your medevac grid is transposed, she said. The line said 18. The board says 81. Read back the actual transmission before that bird launches. Whitlock, riding the tempo, hands on the map, heard only an augmentee on his net again. Back corner, off the net, he said, not even turning. I won't say it twice. She knew exactly what she was doing, and a lesser person would not have been able to do it. Every instinct she had spent a career building told her to stand up, pull the rank she was wearing under the plain uniform, and stop the wrong grid where it sat. Because somewhere in her, the night in 2007 was always 30 seconds away, and a transposed grid was never just a graded error. It was a young voice in the dark, and a bird going to the wrong field. But she was not here to fix one grid. She was here to find out whether her command post could fix itself, and whether the man running it would listen to anyone who was not him. And the only way to learn that was to let him reach the edge of his own certainty and choose. So she sat on her hands, which was the hardest soldiering she would do all night, harder than the night the screens went black, because that night the radio had been the only thing she could do. And this night, the hardest thing was to not key it. The wrong grid stood on the board, circled and confident in his own hand. And the woman who could have ended it, with 1 sentence of rank, wrote the right grid in her notebook a second time, underneath the first, and let him own the call he was walking toward. Ramsey caught Whitlock at the coffee urn, off to the side of the floor, where the light was bad and the words would not carry. He spoke carefully, fenced by a certainty he could not fully explain. Sir, I'm asking you, read back that grid before you push it up, and leave the augmentee alone. Pull the journal entry. Slow the net down for 90 seconds. That's all I'm asking. You're telling a battle captain how to run his own floor, Whitlock said, over a comms clerk. I'm telling you, I've heard that woman run a net before. Ramsey kept his voice down, but it had 20 years under it. I don't know where yet, but I'd put my rank on the table that she copied that grid right the first time, and that your board is wrong. That's all I've got, sir. I'd stake the night on it anyway. Whitlock heard only the challenge. A man who runs a floor on never being the slowest decision in it cannot afford to be told to slow down, least of all by his own NCO in front of the coffee urn. Then go sit down, he said, before I put your name in the journal next to hers. Ramsey could not make him listen, and could not yet say why he was so sure. He stepped back. The look on his face was not defeat. It was the look of a man watching someone walk past the last open door in a burning building. Certain it is still a wall. Back at the dead seat, the woman quoted procedure to herself in the margin of the green notebook, the unit signal SOP line, the one that says no medevac grid is transmitted up the division net without a verified readback. She wrote the paragraph number beside it from memory. She underlined it once. She was not building a complaint. A complaint is a thing you write to be heard later. She was doing something else, something quieter and more exact. She was timing a door. At the field phone desk, Delgado copied the correct grid into her own log, a second time, the way she had been told. She did not do it to inform on anyone. She did it because the quiet woman had told her to copy it twice, and because some instinct that 22-year-olds do not yet have words for told her this log would matter before the sun came up. She had joined the Army 18 months out of a high school, in a town nobody briefed generals about, and she had spent most of those 18 months being told, in 100 small ways, that her job was to copy traffic and stay quiet and let the people with rank do the thinking. And here was a woman with no rank at all, in the worst seat on the floor, doing more thinking than the whole current ops crew put together, and treating Delgado's careful little log like it was the most important document in the building. Don't apologize for being right. Delgado wrote the grid the second time, slow, and she found that her hand was steady, and that she was, for the first time since she had put on the uniform, certain she was on the right side of something. She did not know who the woman was. She only knew that when the woman said copy it twice, she had heard, underneath the words, an order from somebody who had earned the right to give them. Ramsey watched the two of them from the NCOIC desk, the still woman in the back, the steady girl at the field phone. And the year on the bottom of his log seemed to get louder the longer he stared at it. Ramsey returned to the NCOIC desk. Before he sat for just a second, in the bad light where no one on the floor could see him, he came to a small private position of attention, heels together, shoulders square, a thing a body does on its own when it recognizes something the mind has not finished saying out loud. And then he sat and picked up his pen and stared at the dark woman in the back corner like a man one word away from a name. A 20-year master sergeant just braced up for a woman a captain called to help, and he did it where no one could see. If you want to know whose voice on a radio could make a man like that stand at attention in the dark, subscribe and stay. The brief is 2 hours out, and the wrong grid is still on the board. She sat alone in the back corner in the small hours, the floor's noise gone far off, a cup of coffee on the table beside her going cold, and for the length of one part of the night, the story belongs only to her and to you. Her name was Colonel Naomi Hayward, United States Army, and tomorrow morning she would take command of this brigade. She was 46 years old. She had come a day early and out of rank because she had learned, over 24 years, that you never see a command post run honestly once it knows the new commander is in the building. The moment the colonel arrives, everyone behaves for the colonel. So she had asked the division commander for one night as no one, a visitor badge, a plain uniform, a seat at the radios, and General Brennan had looked at her for a long moment and then said only, "Tell the sergeant major," and no one else. The badge was a courtesy of cover. The rank in her records was not. She had not planned to fix anyone's net tonight. She had planned to watch. But the headset on her head was the most serious object in her life, and she could no more let a transposed grid ride up the net than she could stop her own pulse, and to understand that you have to go back 19 years to a room she has never once described at a party. 2007, Iraq. She was 27, a captain, the battle captain in a brigade main command post on a night a patrol went into contact down a black road. She remembered the screens first because of how they died. Every screen in the room going dark at the same instant, the whole picture gone, when a rocket walked into the building and killed the primary communication suite mid-fight. One heartbeat, there was a war on the wall, full of light and certainty. The next heartbeat, there was nothing, and a casualty already down somewhere in the dark, and a young voice on a handset asking where everybody went. And then it was just her, and one backup radio somebody had left, charging in a corner, and a war that did not stop to let her catch up. She held it for 4 hours on that one radio. She rebuilt the fight by voice, held the pinned patrol on the net so they would not feel alone, vectored the quick reaction force in by landmarks because the map feeds were gone, and talked a medevac down to a grid she had copied by ear and read back 3 times. Slow, because there was no one left in the room to check her. She learned that night the thing she has tried to teach every soldier since, and mostly failed, because it sounds like nothing until it is everything. A radio is not a machine. It is the last thread between a frightened young soldier in the dark and every person alive who could save him, and the only thing that keeps the thread from breaking is the discipline nobody ever claps for. She remembered the worst minute of it, with a clarity that 19 years had not dulled. The medevac inbound, the pilot's voice asking her to confirm the grid, and her own voice reading it back, and the half-second of pure animal terror in which she could not be certain, with the screens dead and the map gone, that the numbers in her head were the numbers the patrol had sent. There had been no second log that night, no careful young specialist copying it twice in a corner. There had been only her and her memory, and a young man bleeding on a grid she could not afford to get wrong. She had read it back 3 times, slow, made the patrol confirm it twice, and held the bird until she was sure, and the holding had cost 90 seconds that felt like an hour, and the 90 seconds had been right. She had learned in that minute the difference between fast and good, and she had never once in 19 years confused them again. The badly wounded sergeant on the other end of that net lived. Every soldier came home. She earned a Bronze Star she has never worn to anything that had a band, and she has never told the story because the medal is for the worst night of her life, and she would trade it in a heartbeat for the night never having happened. That was the thing the captain at the center of the floor would never understand on his own, the thing she would have to teach him or relieve him over, that the discipline he called friction wasn't friction. It was the 90 seconds. It was the rid back nobody claps for. It was the second log in the corner. It was every dull, slow, redundant procedure that a fast man learns to skip on a good night, and a wise one keeps for the bad one, because the bad one always comes, and it never sends a warning. And the only thing standing between a young soldier and the wrong field is whether the people in the warm, dry room 1,000 miles away decided, on an ordinary night, that the rule was worth keeping even when it cost them 90 seconds they were sure they did not have. She turned the headset over once in her hands and looked at it, this cheap, mocked, cute little headset, and the symmetry of the room came up around her cold and exact. A flooded net, a transposed grid, a proud man certain the rule was friction. Every plank of her worst night was being raised again in front of her, in miniature, on the command post that would be hers in the morning, and the one person in the building who had held that thread before was sitting in the dead seat, being called Honey. One more thing she let herself notice. The master sergeant at the NCOIC desk who kept staring at her, the one whose face she had half known since she walked in. There had been a young RTO on her net in 2007, a steady kid who kept reading her transmissions back clean when his hands must have been shaking. She had never seen his face. She had only ever known his voice. But she would have bet the same rank. Ramsey was betting that the kid had grown into the man 40 feet away, who could not stop looking at her, and was slowly, in the dark, beginning to remember. 0540. The brief was 90 minutes out, and the medevac was the night's significant event. The thing Division would grade, the thing that would go on a slide with Whitlock's name above it. Ramsey's flag, read back the grid first, sat on the floor unanswered, the way a thing you have decided to ignore sits in a room and changes the temperature of it. And Whitlock reached the moment every gatekeeper reaches, the moment the whole night had been walking toward. The rule was friction, and the clock was real, and he was the fastest decision in the room. He made the call. "My floor, my net, my call," he said. "Send it up with the board grid and log it closed. We are not blowing the timeline 90 minutes out from the brief over a comms clerk's hunch and a master sergeant's nerves. Launch the bird on the board grid." The report went up the division net with the transposed grid on it, the one that put the aircraft in an empty field a kilometer from the casualty. At the field phone desk, Delgado time-stamped the transmission in her log because she had been told to copy everything twice, and her hand did not shake even though she knew. The line was crossed, on the record, over his NCO's flag, in his own journal entry, by his own hand. Then he turned to deal with the last loose end. "And get her off my floor before the brief," he said. "I don't want a visitor badge at the table when the staff walks in. Walk the comms clerk out at shift change." He started the relief entry himself in the journal, in ink. A runner was told to wait by the door and walk the augmentee to the parking lot. For the first time all night, the woman in the back corner looked directly at Captain Grant Whitlock, and the corner of her mouth moved, not in triumph, not even close, but in the small, tired recognition of a thing finally complete. "You transmitted an unverified grid up the division net," she said quietly. "Over your NCO's flag, and you logged it yourself, in ink, 90 minutes from the brief. On the record. Thank you, Captain. That was the part I couldn't do for you." Whitlock did not understand it. He filed it under augmentee nonsense and waved the runner toward her. She stood, unhurried, and gathered the green notebook. But she did not walk toward the exit the runner was indicating. She walked the other way, to the staff journal on its stand, the open record of the whole night, and she laid one finger flat on the line where the wrong grid had gone up the net, the line with his name beside it. 0700. The TOC filled for the commander's update brief. Staff officers came in with coffee and laptops. The brigade operations officer, the fires and intelligence shops, the division liaison. The board went up with the night's significant activities, and the botched medevac was right there in the middle of it. A simulated casualty lost to a transposed grid. The report transmitted up at 0540. Whitlock stood by the board in clean confidence, already rehearsing the sentence in his head. An augmentee keyed onto the net unauthorized and fouled the grid, corrected too late, noted in the journal. He had a name to hang it on, and a journal entry to back him. He was, he believed, 90 seconds from briefing his way clean out of it. The door at the back opened. Major General Curtis Brennan, the division commander, came in fast, with the brigade command sergeant major Iris Pruitt half a step behind him. The floor began to come to attention for the general, the way a floor does. Chairs scraping, bodies rising, the word group already forming in someone's throat. Brennan's eyes crossed the room and stopped. They stopped on the woman at the back radio, the one with no rank on her chest, the one with the plastic visitor badge and the green notebook and the cute little headset hung now over the back of her chair. He stopped mid-step. And then, deliberately, in front of his entire staff, Major General Curtis Brennan stood square and still and faced her, and the half-finished reflex of the whole room rose the rest of the way with him, because a room reads its general's body before it reads anything else. A major general does not stop for a comms clerk. The whole floor felt the wrongness of it a half second before they understood it. The way you feel the floor of an elevator drop before your stomach catches up. "Colonel Hayward." Brennan said it level and plain. No theatrics. The way you greet someone you respect across a room. "I told the sergeant major you'd see everything you needed to in one night. Looks like you did." Command Sergeant Major Pruitt confirmed it for the room, without raising her voice, because some facts do not need volume. "Colonel Hayward takes command of this brigade tomorrow morning," she said. "She's been on your net all night, Captain Whitlock." No formation, no barked call to attention, no mass salute. Only a general standing for the officer who owned the room, and a room standing because he did. It was, in its way, more powerful than any formation could have been. A formation is a thing you are ordered into. Your body braces because a voice told it to, and the meaning is borrowed from the order. This was different. There was no order. There was only a 2-star general who had walked into a room, seen a woman in a dead seat with no rank on her chest, and chosen, with his whole staff watching, with nothing forcing his hand, to stand still and straight and quiet, the way a soldier stands for the 1 or 2 people in a career who have genuinely earned it. The staff read it instantly, the way soldiers always read the body of the senior person in the room, and they stood not because they understood yet, but because he had, and understanding came rolling in behind the motion a half-second late, like thunder behind a flash. Across the floor, Master Sergeant Theo Ramsey was already on his feet, and his was the only spine in the room that had braced before the general's did, because his had braced an hour ago in the bad light, when his memory had finally handed him the year. Whitlock's face did the cycle, the confusion first, the open, searching look of a man whose categories have failed. "Colonel," he said. "No, she's an augmentee. There's a visitor badge. That can't be." He looked at the badge. He looked at the general. He looked at the woman he had called honey at 03 in the morning, and the disbelief curdled into recognition, and the recognition dropped into the cold, bottomless thing underneath it, which was the understanding of exactly what he had done, and where and in whose ink. "There was an error, Captain," Hayward said, still quiet. Still the same flat, unhurried cadence she had untangled the net with 5 hours before. "You sent it up the net 90 minutes ago, over your own master sergeant, and you logged it yourself." On the board behind him, the wrong grid was still circled in his own hand. And under the eyes of the whole brief, the staff, the liaison, the sergeant major, the general, the floor went perfectly still. Every face turned to the woman who had sat the dead seat all night, and had been, the entire time, the commander of the brigade. She did not gloat. She worked. She crossed to the board, took the marker, and corrected the grid to the 1 in her green notebook, 1-8, where the transmission had always put it, and walked the brief, step by step, through what had actually happened on the net at 0540. The flood, the transposition, the flag her master sergeant had raised, the readback that was never done. She closed the night's significant activity honestly. In the exercise, on the corrected grid, the simulated casualty was recovered. She did in 2 minutes what the floor had refused to do in 2 hours, and she did it without raising her voice and without once saying the word rank. Then she dealt with the captain, not in front of the room, but at the edge of the floor, where the light was bad and the words would not carry, the same place he had told his master sergeant to sit down. "I'm not going to end your career, Captain," she said. "You'd take that easier than what I'm actually going to do, which is keep you. You ran this floor by who looked important, and never once by who was right. You had a master sergeant with 20 years on the net beg you to read back a grid, and you put his name in your journal for it. Tomorrow, I take this brigade. You will run this current operations floor under me until you have learned the only thing this room is for, that the soldier on the other end of the net is real, even when the war isn't. Read your own journal entry. Then read the SOP paragraph underneath it, the one about verified readbacks. It was on the floor all night. So was I. She did not raise her voice once. She did not have to. The man who had spent the night being the fastest decision in the room would now spend a year being the slowest, under the woman he had called the help. And they both understood that this was the heavier sentence and the fairer one. If you stayed on this floor to the second, a general stood for the woman in the dead seat. Do the one thing that keeps these stories coming. Subscribe to Honor Tales, and let the next person who gets called the help find their story here too. She was not finished. She put Specialist Ren Delgado forward to the sergeant major by name, because copy it twice was the only reason the right grid had existed in a second log when it mattered, and told Pruitt to track the young specialist for the next radio leaders course. She did the one thing nobody on this floor ordered her to do, Hayward said, loud enough for the brief to hear it, because some things should be said where the volume usually lives. She kept a true record when the easy thing was to keep a quiet one. That's not a specialist's instinct. That's a leader's. Find out where she wants to go, Sergeant Major, and help her get there. Delgado, at the field phone desk, went very still and then very red, and stared at her own log as though it had grown heavier in her hands, and in a sense it had. Then she turned, last, to the master sergeant who had braced up for her in the dark. "You stood for me before anyone made you, Master Sergeant," she said. "In the bad light, where it didn't buy you anything. I heard you on a net once, a long time ago, when it was very dark, and you were a lot younger, and your readbacks never once shook. I'm glad it was you holding this floor together tonight." Ramsey's voice came out rougher than he meant it. "Took me half the night to place your voice, ma'am. 2007. 2007, she said. The brief broke. The sun came up gray and ordinary through the Tuak's one window, and out on the parade field, the change of command guidons were already being staged in the early light, the cased colors waiting for morning. Hayward sat back down at the radio one last time. She copied the dawn net once, for nothing, for the plain pleasure of a clean handoff, and she wrote the last line of the night in the staff journal in her own hand. There was no phone in her pocket that buzzed with a coded greeting. There was no named city, no foreign port, no ghost from a roster reaching across the water. There was only a colonel who had learned her brigade in one night on the net, lifting the cheap headset off her head and setting it down on the current ops table, gently, with both hands, because she, of anyone in the building, knew exactly what it was, and exactly what it costs to let the thread break. Every soldier carries a story that few ever hear. Listen with your heart. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to Honor Tales for more.